The boardroom sat 30 floors above Manhattan, all marble and glass, and the kind of silence that comes before blood. Marcus Sterling stood at the head of a table worth more than most men earned in a lifetime, his fingers pressed flat against reports that told him everything he needed to know. 12 underbosses, 15 states, 2.3 billion in annual operations. And one traitor, the scar running from his temple to his cheekbone, caught the afternoon light, a permanent reminder that even kings bleed. At 36, Marcus had built his reputation on three principles. Never raise your voice when a whisper will do. Never ask a question when you already know the answer. And never, ever show weakness. He looked at each man in turn. Boston, Chicago, Seattle, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Detroit. The usual faces, the usual postures. Vincent Torino from Boston sat with his hands folded, expensive watch glinting. Sal Benedetti from Chicago chewed gum like he was at a baseball game. Young blood from Seattle, trying too hard to look relaxed. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, and the room went quieter still. "We have a situation." Nathan Cole, 45 years of loyalty compressed into a frame built for violence, set a folder in front of each man. Inside, photographs of a San Diego warehouse, 12 body bags, and $40 million in cocaine that would never reach its destination. 12 of our people, Marcus continued, his voice carrying the weight of a death sentence. The Rodriguez cartel knew exactly when and where to hit us. They knew our route, our timing, our security protocols. He let that sink in, watched faces. Vincent's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sal stopped chewing. Seattle's eyes went to the photographs and stayed there. "Now," Marcus said, placing both palms on the table and leaning forward, "we can handle this one of two ways. The guilty party can speak now, and we'll make it quick. Or I can spend the next month finding out, and it won't be quick at all." Silence. "I thought so." Marcus straightened. "Tonight is my birthday celebration. 300 guests. The finest food and wine New York can provide. You're all invited, of course." He smiled, and it was the smile of a man who'd seen too much death to fear it anymore. "Enjoy the party, gentlemen. One of you won't see sunrise." And Byron. The meeting dissolved like smoke. Nathan stayed behind, waiting until the last footsteps faded down the corridor. "You have suspects?" he asked. Marcus moved to the window, looking out over the city that was his kingdom. "3, but I'll know which one by how they dance tonight." Nathan's eyebrow raised a fraction. In 15 years of service, he'd learned to read Marcus like a battle plan. This was something different. "Dance? A man shows his true self in 3 places," Marcus said. "When he thinks he's winning, when he knows he's losing, and when he's trying to look like neither." He turned from the window. "Tonight they'll all be watching me, but I'll be watching them. And if you're wrong," Marcus's gray eyes held the kind of cold that comes from watching your father burn alive at 15. "Then we try the other 2 tomorrow." Bam. 21 years ago, that same office had belonged to another man. Richard Sterling sat across from his teenage son, ledgers spread between them like a map of an empire built on sand. The older Sterling had his father's height, but none of his cruelty, a fact that both defined and doomed him. "An empire isn't held by fear alone, son." Richard's voice carried the kind of warmth Marcus would spend 2 decades trying to forget. "Fear is a tool, but loyalty is the foundation. See these numbers?" Young Marcus leaned closer, studying columns of figures that represented territories, operations, families under protection. "Behind each one is a family we protect, a business we shield, a community we serve," Richard continued. "Your grandfather built this empire, but he built it on sand. I'm trying to turn it to stone before the tide comes." 15-year-old Marcus frowned. "Grandfather says business is war." "Your grandfather says a lot of things." Richard closed the ledger with more force than necessary. "Not all of them are true." The argument had come later that night, voices carrying through the study door, where young Marcus pressed his ear to mahogany worth more than most cars. "Father, I know what you did to Carlos Moreno." William Sterling's voice, cold as winter stone. "That name is dead, as is this conversation. The Moreno daughter still lives, the dancer. She has a child, who I will find and eliminate as I eliminated the father." A pause, then Richard's voice, steady despite what must have been terror. "Then you'll have to eliminate me first." Marcus hadn't understood. Not then. He filed it away with all the other adult mysteries, all the pieces of a puzzle he wouldn't see clearly for 2 more decades. That night, Richard left the estate in his Mercedes. Marcus watched from his bedroom window, homework forgotten, as his father's car disappeared down the tree-lined drive. He'd planned to ask about the Moreno family at breakfast, planned to ask why grandfather's voice had gone so cold. He never got the chance. The explosion at the bridge lit up the night sky like a second sun. Marcus ran, 15 years old and fast, ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out. Found his father's car upside down, flames eating through metal and leather and flesh. Found Richard Sterling dying, burned beyond recognition but still breathing, still trying to speak through a throat full of smoke and blood. Marcus, each word cost him everything. Not accident, your grandfather. Protect the Moreno girl. She's innocent. Don't become him. The light went out of Richard Sterling's eyes at 11:43 p.m. on a Thursday in April, and something went out of his son too. William Sterling arrived minutes later, placed a hand on young Marcus's shoulder with what might have been sympathy if you didn't know better. Your father was weak, the old man said, watching the fire consume his son's body. Made enemies. This is what weakness costs. He squeezed Marcus's shoulder hard. You're the heir now. I'll teach you to be strong.
Yeah.
In the present, Marcus stood in his study before the party, staring at a photograph of Richard that he kept on the desk where no one could see. His father smiled out from behind glass, frozen at 43, forever younger than Marcus was now. I became exactly what you feared, Dad, Marcus said to the empty room. Ruthless, cold, efficient. His fingers traced the frame's edge. But I kept the empire strong. Isn't that what you wanted? The photograph offered no answer. It never did. 6 a.m., and Isabella Cruz had already serviced 15 rooms. She moved through Sterling Manor like water, like shadow, like something that existed only in the periphery of vision. 29 years old, and she'd spent 11 of them learning to be invisible. The scars on her back, hidden beneath her worn uniform, told the story of every time she'd failed that lesson. Her routine never varied. East Wing first, starting with the guest suites that nobody used, dust that didn't exist, polished surfaces already gleaming. The work wasn't the point. The point was being seen doing it, being marked as harmless, as useful, as nothing worth noticing. She'd learned that in the 3 years before Sophia found her. Learned it in rooms that smelled of sweat and fear, learned it from men who taught with fists and worse. Invisibility wasn't just survival, it was an art form. The other staff deferred to her now, 11 years earning her a kind of seniority that meant nothing and everything. Head housekeeper in all but title, though the title would never come. She was property, and property didn't get promoted. But property could listen, property could watch, property could map every room, every schedule, every secret meeting held in studies that thought themselves secure. Isabella had spent 11 years building a mental archive of everything that happened in Sterling Manor. She didn't know why. Instinct, maybe. The same instinct that had kept her alive at 7 when the gunfire started, at 10 when Sophia pulled her from the trafficking ring, at 18 when Catherine Sterling hired her for a position they didn't need filled. Survival built habits. Habits built knowledge. Knowledge built options. Not that options mattered when you had nowhere to go. She reached the grand ballroom at 8:30, right on schedule. The party was tonight. 300 place settings to verify, 50 crystal chandeliers to inspect, miles of silk and silver to confirm. Isabella climbed the ladder to check the third chandelier from the left, the one that always hung slightly crooked no matter how many times maintenance adjusted it. From this height, she could see the whole room. The stage where an orchestra would play, the bar where fortunes would be drunk, the doors through which power would flow like water. And the painting, her hands froze on the ladder's rungs. It hung behind where the head table would sit, massive and ornate and impossible. A woman dancing, black hair streaming in wind that existed only in the artist's imagination, feet defying gravity in a way that made the heart ache. Isabella knew that painting, had grown up with a smaller version of it hanging in a room that smelled of jasmine and old bread in an apartment where Sophia Moreno taught her that dancing wasn't in the feet but in the soul. This is your great-grandmother, Sophia had said, 10-year-old Isabella staring up at the image with wonder. She danced for presidents. We come from kings and queens, mija, never forget. Then why are we poor? Sophia's silence had been answer enough. But this painting, here, in the house of the family that had taken everything. Isabella stared for 15 seconds, 14 seconds too long. But Diana Sterling watched from across the ballroom, a glass of wine in one hand and malice in her heart. She'd hated Isabella Cruz from the first day, 11 years of watching the maid endure every cruelty without breaking. Hated the scars Diana herself had put on that brown skin. Hated how they never made the woman beg. Hated the eyes most of all, dark and deep and holding a flame that no amount of violence could extinguish. And now Isabella was staring at the painting, at their grandfather's portrait of a woman whose name was supposed to be forgotten. Diana set down her wine and crossed the ballroom with the grace of a predator who'd spotted weakness. Catherine Sterling stood near the windows, examining floral arrangements with the kind of attention that suggested she was avoiding something. Diana's mother had perfected the art of looking busy while seeing everything, a skill Diana had inherited along with the Sterling name. "Mother," Diana said, her voice carrying just enough edge to cut, "how long has that painting been there?" Catherine's hand trembled, almost imperceptibly, on the rose she'd been inspecting. "Your grandfather commissioned it 40 years ago." "Of whom?" "A dancer he admired, before your father was born." The words came out practiced, smooth, too smooth. Diana's eyes narrowed. The maid was staring at it, like she recognized it. The rose dropped from Catherine's fingers. "Impossible," the older woman said, but her voice had gone hollow. Diana watched her mother's face, watched the careful mask slip just enough to confirm what she'd suspected for years. Catherine knew something, something about the maid, something about the painting, something Diana was going to find out. Catherine waited until Diana left, then made her way to her private study on legs that felt like water. The drawer unlocked with a key she kept on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath silken pearls and the weight of 21 years of secrets. Inside, 2 photographs, edges worn from handling. The first showed a young woman dancing, the same woman from the ballroom painting. Written on the back in ink, faded to brown, Sophia Moreno, 1985. The second photograph was harder to look at. A child, maybe 7, dark hair and darker eyes, staring at the camera with an expression far too old for her face. Written on the back, Elena Cruz's daughter, 1999. Catherine held the second photograph next to her mental image of Isabella Cruz, and the resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes, the same tilt to the chin, the same fire that no amount of suffering could extinguish. "Richard," Catherine whispered to the empty room, "I've kept my promise, but I can't protect her from everything." She fed both photographs to the fireplace, watched them curl and blacken, and turn to ash. Then she poured 3 fingers of whiskey, drank it standing, and went to the window that overlooked the gardens where Isabella was hanging laundry with the kind of efficiency that came from 11 years of practice. The girl had no idea. No idea who she really was. No idea what she represented. No idea that Catherine had hired her 11 years ago because Richard Sterling's dying wish had been to protect Carlos Moreno's bloodline, and this was the only way Catherine knew how. Keep her close. Keep her invisible. Keep her alive. Until when? Catherine didn't know, had never known, had spent 11 years watching Isabella scrub floors and serve meals and endure Diana's cruelty, all while carrying the blood of empire in her veins. "I'm sorry," Catherine said to the girl who couldn't hear her. "I'm so sorry." Wissam. 9 p.m. and Sterling Manor blazed with light. 300 guests filled the ballroom like a catalog of American power. Senators whose votes were bought and paid for. Judges who knew which cases to lose. CEOs whose books didn't bear close examination. And scattered among them, the real power. Men whose names never appeared in Forbes, but whose word was law in 15 states. The wine cost $500 a bottle. The security cost considerably more. Maestro Thomas Lawson, 68 years old and legendary, sat at a grand piano worth more than most houses, his aged fingers resting on keys that had been played by masters. Marcus moved through the crowd like a shark through shallow water, shaking hands and accepting toasts and watching. Always watching. Vincent from Boston laughed too hard at his jokes. Sal from Chicago avoided eye contact. Seattle kept checking his phone. One of them had sold him out. One of them had killed 12 of his people. One of them wouldn't survive the night. But first, the show. Diana found him between conversations, her beautiful face set in lines of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Brother," she said, voice low enough that only he could hear. "A moment. About the help." Marcus felt irritation flash through him like heat lightning. "Not now, Diana. I'm managing 3 crises. This concerns family legacy." She stepped closer, and her next words came out carefully measured. "The maid, Isabella Cruz, she was staring at grandfather's portrait, the Moreno dancer." Marcus went very still. "What did you say?" Diana knew she had him now. She looked at it like she owned it, and she told another maid her grandmother danced better than any Sterling. The lie came out smooth as silk. Diana had years of practice. Marcus's mind, trained by 2 decades of strategic thinking, began connecting dots at lightning speed. His father's last words: "Protect the Moreno girl." The painting of Sofia Moreno, a maid named Cruz. Elena Cruz had been Sofia's daughter, Carlos Moreno's granddaughter. If this woman carried that blood, she was more than an employee. She was a threat to everything. "You're certain?" he asked. "I heard it myself." Marcus looked past Diana to where Isabella moved through the crowd with a tray of champagne, invisible and efficient, and completely unaware that her world was about to end. 3 options presented themselves with the kind of clarity that came from years of solving problems permanently. Option 1, eliminate her quietly. Safest, cleanest. Option 2, public humiliation. Send a message. Remind everyone what happened to those who claimed what wasn't theirs. Option 3, test her. See what she knows. See what she is. Marcus had built his empire on knowing when to use the knife and when to use the scalpel. This situation called for precision. He chose option 3, wrapped in the theater of option 2. "Nathan," he said, and his right hand appeared as if summoned. "I need the orchestra to stop in 5 minutes. Clear the center floor and bring me Isabella Cruz." The music died like someone had cut its throat. 300 conversations stuttered to silence. All eyes turned to Marcus Sterling, standing on the stage where the orchestra had been playing, backlit by crystal chandeliers that turned him into something between a man and a monument. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried across the ballroom without effort, trained by years of making himself heard in rooms that didn't want to listen. "Forgive the interruption." He waited. Let the silence build. Let anticipation become anxiety. "Tonight we celebrate the Sterling legacy. 50 years of building something from nothing. 50 years of protecting what's ours against those who would take it." Applause rippled through the crowd, polite, uncertain. But legacies must be defended. Marcus let his gaze sweep the room, against enemies without and enemies within. The applause died. 2 guards brought Isabella to the stage. Not roughly, but inevitably. She didn't resist. 11 years had taught her that resistance only made things worse. But her eyes, those dark eyes that Diana hated so much, tracked every exit, every weapon, every potential ally. She found none. Marcus watched her climb the stairs, watched the way she moved, economical and precise. No wasted energy. Survival instinct honed to a razor's edge. "This woman," he said to the crowd, "has served the Sterling household for 11 years. My sister informs me she claims her grandmother danced better than Sterling blood." Laughter, nervous and eager, rippled through the ballroom. Isabella stood center stage, head slightly bowed, hands at her sides, waiting, calculating, planning 3 moves ahead, even though she knew there was no escape. Marcus drew the Sig Sauer from his shoulder holster with the kind of casual grace that suggested he'd done it 1,000 times before. Set it on the piano with a soft click that somehow carried to every corner of the room. Maestro Thomas's eyes widened. The old man was staring at Isabella's face like he'd seen a ghost. "If you can dance the waltz Maestro Lawson selects," Marcus said, his voice dropping to something almost gentle, "I'll spare your life." He let that hang in the air for 3 heartbeats. "If you fail, this conversation ends here, permanently." Catherine Sterling, standing in the crowd, made a sound like a wounded animal. But Marcus's glance silenced her as effectively as a hand over her mouth. Isabella looked at the gun, looked at Marcus, looked at the 300 faces staring at her with the kind of hunger that came before violence. She could kneel, could beg, could cry and plead and maybe earn a quick death instead of a slow one. But Sofia Moreno hadn't pulled her from hell just so she could die on her knees. "I accept." The words cut through the silence like a blade. Shock rippled through the crowd. Nathan Cole's hand went to his weapon, protecting Marcus from a threat that didn't exist. Marcus raised an eyebrow, and for the first time that night, something like genuine interest crossed his face. "You understand the stakes?" "I've understood stakes my whole life." Isabella lifted her chin, and in that moment, she looked like something more than a maid. "You're the one playing a game you don't understand." No one spoke to Marcus Sterling like that, ever. Diana's mouth fell open. Nathan tensed. Vincent and Sal exchanged glances that promised future complications. And Marcus smiled. "Then raise them," he said. "If you win, you go free. Truly free." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell whiskey and expensive tobacco on his breath. "But you'll dance in those." He gestured to her worn shoes, black leather, cracked from 11 years of invisible service, and to a waltz of Maestro Lawson's choosing. No preparation, no music you know, just you, your dead grandmother's ghost, and 300 witnesses. Isabella held his gaze for a long moment. Then she bent down and removed her shoes, setting them aside with a kind of ceremony that suggested she was shedding more than footwear. 11 years of submission, 11 years of invisibility, 11 years of being property. She straightened, barefoot on marble that was cold enough to burn. Choose the music, maestro. Whistam. Thomas Lawson's hands trembled on the piano keys. He'd been instructed to choose something impossible, a waltz so complex that no untrained dancer could hope to follow. Something that would prove Marcus's point and end this unfortunate woman's life with a minimum of mess. But he couldn't stop staring at her face. The tilt of her head, the set of her shoulders, the way she'd removed her shoes like a warrior removing armor. He'd seen all of it before, 40 years ago, in a woman who danced like gravity was optional and love was eternal. Sophia Moreno. Impossible. But Thomas had learned that impossible just meant you weren't looking at the right angle. His hands moved to the keys of their own accord, muscle memory from 4 decades ago reaching across time to play a melody he'd sworn never to perform publicly. The composition his son Daniel had written for the woman he loved. The first notes rose like ghosts, achingly beautiful, carrying sorrow and joy in equal measure. Isabella's eyes snapped open. She knew this melody. Sophia had hummed it every night before sleep, had sung it while teaching her to dance, had whispered it with her dying breath. The love song of a man who died before Isabella was born. The music wrapped around her like arms she barely remembered, and something in her chest that had been locked for 11 years finally broke open. She began to move. The first step was barely a step at all. A shift of weight, foot placed with absolute precision. The audience leaned forward, confused. Was she dancing or frozen? The second step came 4 beats later. A turn, economical and exact. Arms rising not like a ballet dancer, but like a fighter taking stance. Marcus, standing at the stage's edge, leaned forward despite himself. This wasn't what he'd expected. The third step, and Isabella wasn't Isabella anymore. She was Sophia. She was Elena. She was every woman in her bloodline who'd loved and lost and risen again. The waltz poured from her like water from a spring, natural and unstoppable. Her bare feet gripped marble with the kind of control that suggested professional training, years of it, thousands of hours compressed into movements that looked effortless. 6 fouette turns, each one covering 6 feet of stage. Transitions from pointed foot to flat without breaking rhythm. A développé à la seconde held for 8 full beats, core strength that most dancers spent a decade building. Judge Harrison, 62 years on federal bench, leaned toward the senator beside him. My daughter studied ballet for 15 years, he whispered. She couldn't do that. Don Vittorio, representing Chicago interests old enough to remember when the organization had different names, watched with the eyes of a man who'd seen every kind of violence and recognized discipline when he saw it. Street fighter footwork, he muttered to his lieutenant. See how she's clearing sight lines? That's tactical movement. Nathan Cole, standing beside Marcus, did the same calculation. Sir, she's repositioning. Every turn, she's mapping exits. I noticed, Marcus said, and his voice carried something new. Not anger, something closer to respect. The music swelled, and Isabella rose with it. Her hair came loose, black silk streaming behind her like a banner. The shoulder seam of her uniform tore, revealing skin marked with old violence. She didn't stop, didn't slow, turned faster, jumped higher, claimed space like it belonged to her and always had. The waltz became a story written in movement. A chassé sequence that spoke of running, of escaping, a sustained arabesque that told of endurance through years of darkness, pirouettes that spun away from the past, a grand jeté that soared towards something better. Maestro Thomas played with tears streaming down his weathered face, giving her everything he had. Every note became a weapon, every measure a shield. He was playing for Daniel, for Sophia, for the granddaughter he'd searched for without knowing her name. The melody climbed toward its climax, and Isabella's movements became something beyond technique. Each turn carried the weight of her 7-year-old self watching her parents die. Each leap held 3 years of hell in trafficking rings. Each sustained position embodied 11 years of slavery in a house that should have been her birthright. Then came the final sequence. 12 fouette turns, virtuoso level, the kind of thing that separated professionals from pretenders. Isabella spun like a dervish, like a storm given human form. At the eighth turn, her uniform tore completely at the back. 300 people saw what Diana Sterling had done over 11 years. Whip marks layered over knife cuts, layered over burns. A topography of suffering carved into human flesh. The crowd went silent. Different silence than before. This silence held shame. Isabella spiraled into a deep backbend, fabric hanging in tatters, scars on full display. Her arms spread wide like wings, like someone offering themselves to judgment they'd already survived. Marcus stood without realizing it. In 36 years, he'd never stood during a performance. Nathan noticed, filed it away with all the other data that suggested tonight was changing things that shouldn't change. The final note approached, and Isabella rose from the back bend into a single perfect pirouette. She stopped center stage, arms falling to her sides, eyes opening to look straight at Marcus. No pleading in that gaze, just challenge. The last note died. 10 seconds of silence, 20, 30. A glass shattered somewhere in the crowd, a waiter's hands shaking too hard. Then applause erupted like thunder. But it wasn't polite appreciation. 300 people rose to their feet, hardened men and women who'd seen everything, standing and clapping because they just witnessed something they couldn't name but recognize anyway. Warrior honoring warrior, survivor acknowledging survivor. Marcus walked onto the stage. The applause continued, but he didn't hear it. All he heard was his father's voice, 21 years dead, whispering, "Protect the Moreno girl." He stopped in front of Isabella, close enough to see that she wasn't trembling, close enough to see that her eyes held no fear, only a kind of exhausted triumph. Then Marcus Sterling, the Reaper of the East Coast, the man who'd never bowed to anyone, inclined his head. Not submission, acknowledgement. The crowd's shock rolled through the ballroom like a wave. Diana nearly dropped her wine glass. Catherine closed her eyes and thought of Richard. Marcus straightened and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "You surprised me." He paused, and in that pause lay 21 years of violence, of building an empire on bones, of becoming everything his father feared. More than that, in 36 years, I've seen men dance with death. Few as well as you just dance with fate. Isabella's chest rose and fell from exertion, but her gaze never wavered. "I keep my promises," Marcus said. "You won't die tonight." Relief flickered across Isabella's face. "Mistake. But I can't let you leave." The relief died. "You promised freedom," Isabella said, and her voice carried across the silent ballroom like a gunshot. "I promised to spare your life." Marcus's smile was the smile of a lawyer who'd found the loophole. "Your life is yours. Your location isn't." He turned to address the crowd, framing it the way he framed everything, strategy wrapped in logic. "This woman is clearly more than she appears. Professionally trained, expensive training, someone invested in her. I want to know who and why." It made sense. To the underbosses, to the politicians, to everyone who understood that information was power and mystery was threat. "She remains Sterling property until I have answers." Catherine's eyes closed. Richard's last wish failed. Diana trembled with fury barely contained. She'd expected execution, got elevation instead. And Isabella, standing center stage in her torn uniform and bare feet, made her calculation in the space of 3 heartbeats. Can't fight 300 people. Can't escape a house she'd mapped but never tested. Can't win this battle. So retreat. Gather intelligence. Plan the war. "Understood," she said. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. Nathan Cole appeared at her elbow. "He's never spared anyone before," the older man whispered as he guided her off stage. "You're either very lucky or very valuable. Figure out which." The East Wing suite was larger than the apartment where Isabella had lived with Sophia. 4-poster bed with silk sheets. Rosewood wardrobe filled with dresses worth more than 11 years of invisible wages. Crystal perfume bottles catching moonlight. A window overlooking rose gardens that might as well have been on the moon. Isabella's first action was tactical assessment. Windows, locked reinforced glass, 30-foot drop to stone that would break bones. Door, solid oak, lock on the outside, guard posted in hallway. Bathroom, window too small for an adult body. Walls shared with Diana's suite, which made them a liability. Conclusion, prison with better decor. She tested the window locks anyway. Checked bathroom pipes for access to larger systems. Examined the air vent with the kind of thoroughness that came from 3 years of looking for escape routes in trafficking houses. Everything sealed, everything watched. But behind the wardrobe, Isabella found something. A baseboard that sat just slightly wrong. gap behind it leading to what might have been old servant passages from when this house had different owners. Too small to use now, sealed years ago, but it proved the passages existed. Information filed away for future use. Diana arrived at midnight, entering without knocking because she had a key and wanted Isabella to know it. "Comfortable?" she asked, voice dripping venom. "Should I be? My brother sparing you was weakness." Diana stepped closer and her beautiful face twisted into something ugly. "He'll regret it." "If I'm such a threat," Isabella said, meeting her eyes without flinching, "why not kill me yourself?" "Because even trash can rot foundations if left in place long enough." Diana's smile was sharp enough to cut. "But don't worry, I'm patient." She left, heels clicking on marble like a countdown. Isabella waited until the sound faded, then returned to the window. From here, she could see the guard rotations. Every 2 hours, like clockwork. Could count the visible security cameras, 12 of them, which meant probably 20 total. Could map the grounds, rose garden, garage, gate. She sat in the window seat, moonlight painting her scarred shoulders silver, and did what she'd done every day for 11 years. She planned her survival, not with tears, not with despair, with the cold calculation of someone who'd escaped worse cages than this. Sofia Moreno hadn't taught her to dance just so she could die behind locked doors. She'd taught her to survive. And Isabella Cruz, great-granddaughter of Carlos Moreno, granddaughter of Sofia, daughter of Elena, had spent 20 years learning that lesson. This was just another test. She would pass it the way she'd passed all the others. By refusing to break, the moon climbed higher over Manhattan, painting the Sterling estate in shades of silver and shadow. Inside the East Wing, a prisoner who didn't know she was a queen sat planning her freedom. And in his study, Marcus Sterling sat staring at his father's photograph, wondering what the hell he'd just started. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tonight brought only questions, and the memory of a dance that had shaken something loose in him that he'd thought was dead. The game had changed. The pieces were moving, and neither player knew yet that they were fighting on the same side. The first night, Isabella didn't sleep. She sat by the window counting guard rotations, mapping camera angles, memorizing the rhythm of a house that breathed power and secrets in equal measure. The second night, she didn't sleep either, but this time it was because Marcus Sterling came to visit. 11 p.m., no knock. Just the sound of a key turning in a lock that was supposed to keep her safe but only kept her caged. His silhouette filled the doorway, backlit by hallway sconces that cost more than most people earned in a year. "We need to talk," he said. Isabella stood from the window seat, survival instinct forcing her back a step before she caught herself. 11 years of training screamed at her to lower her eyes, to defer, to disappear. She did none of those things. "About what?" Her voice came out steady. "Small victory." Marcus entered, and she noticed he carried a folder. Business documents by the look of them. He set them on the table between them like evidence at a trial. "Who trained you to dance?" "My grandmother. Professional level training costs $50,000 annually minimum." His gray eyes tracked her face the way a sniper tracks a target. "For how long?" 8 years. "That's $400,000. He tilted his head slightly. "Where did a woman living in slums get that kind of money?" Isabella held his gaze. "Where did your grandfather get his empire?" The deflection landed like a jab. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and she filed that reaction away with everything else she was learning. He moved to the window, looking out over grounds that were his kingdom. "I researched you after tonight. Isabella Cruz. No records before age 18. Birth certificate exists, but parents listed as deceased. Rafael and Elena Cruz, killed in home invasion 1999. Each word felt like a scalpel, precise and cutting. "You were 7, he continued. Disappeared for 3 years, reappeared at 10. Then nothing until you arrived here at 18. He turned to face her, and in his expression she saw the same calculating intelligence that had built an empire. "Those are the facts. Now tell me the story." Isabella ran the calculation in 3 seconds. He already knew most of it. Was fishing for confirmation, testing for lies. She could give him edited truth and maybe buy time to figure out his real angle. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." She exhaled slowly. "Parents murdered when I was 7. I ran, ended up in trafficking ring, 3 years there." The words came out flat, emotionless. She'd learned long ago that emotion gave interrogators leverage. "Woman bought me out. Sofia Moreno. Raised me until I was 16, taught me to dance. She died, had nothing. Ended up here." Marcus absorbed this with the stillness of a man who'd heard countless confessions. "Sofia Moreno. The dancer in my grandfather's painting. Yes. How did she know your parents? She was my grandmother. The silence that followed was the kind that comes before explosions. Marcus walked back to the window, and she could see his mind working through implications, connections, threats. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, softer, more dangerous. Did Sophia ever mention a name, Daniel Lawson? Isabella's micro-expression gave her away before she could stop it, recognition flashing across her face for maybe half a second. But Marcus Sterling had spent 20 years reading people's lies. Once, Isabella admitted, when she was dying, she said his name and cried, "I never knew who he was." Marcus turned, and something in his posture had shifted. He was Maestro Thomas's son, died 40 years ago. My father said my grandfather killed him. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the scar tissue around his eyes from years of violence. Do you know why? No, Isabella lifted her chin. But I know your grandfather killed my parents too. So we're even. Two orphans made by the same man. The words hung between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross. Marcus studied her for a long moment. We're not even, not close, but we might be able to use each other. Use each other how? That's what I'm trying to figure out. He collected his folder from the table. I'll come back tomorrow night, and the night after that, until I understand why you haunt me the way you do. He left without waiting for a response. The lock clicked behind him with the finality of a cell door. Isabella returned to the window, but now her mind raced with new data. Daniel Lawson, Maestro Thomas's son, killed by William Sterling, connected to Sophia somehow. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture she didn't want to see, but couldn't look away from. I hear. Day 4 brought a different kind of trouble. The Sterling Council convened an emergency session, 12 underbosses filling the marble conference room with the kind of tension that preceded violence. Marcus sat at the head of the table, Nathan Cole at his right hand, and tried not to think about the woman locked 3 floors above them. Vincent Torino from Boston cleared his throat with the authority of someone who controlled 40% of the Eastern Seaboard's port traffic. Marcus, we need to discuss the guest. You mean the dancer? The maid you're keeping in the East Wing. Vincent's expensive watch caught the light as he gestured. It looks weak. Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Sal from Chicago nodded. Seattle's representative checked his phone, which meant he was uncomfortable agreeing out loud, but agreed nonetheless. Marcus let the silence build before responding. Looks weak or looks strategic? All due respect, Vincent pressed. Keeping a woman who humiliated you in front of 300 witnesses sends a message, just not the one you want. That woman is a key to something my grandfather hid. Marcus's voice stayed level, but his eyes went cold. Until I know what, she stays. The conference room door opened. Diana Sterling entered, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. She wore Armani and authority in equal measure. Took a seat at the table like she'd been invited. Like she belonged. Marcus raised an eyebrow. This is a council meeting. Father gave me 20% shares before he died. Diana's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. I have a vote. Father's been dead 21 years. You're cashing in now? The men are right, Marcus. You're obsessed with this maid. It's affecting your judgment. She looked around the table, making eye contact with each underboss. Meanwhile, we lost another shipment yesterday, Seattle. That's 3 in 2 weeks. The room shifted. Money talked louder than family loyalty. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the picture of casual control. Nathan, full audit on my sister, accounts, movements, communications, everything. Diana's composure cracked. You're accusing me? I'm being methodical. You're next on the list. Marcus stood, signaling the meeting's end. Gentlemen, you'll have my decision on the leak within 48 hours. Until then, double your security and trust no one. He left them there, Diana's fury following him down the corridor like smoke. Nathan caught up 3 hallways later. Sir, you don't really suspect her? Diana's too emotional for long-term strategy. The real leak is someone cooler, more patient. Marcus stopped at a window overlooking the gardens. But I needed to shake the tree, see what falls out. And if nothing falls, then I look harder. Yes. Night 6, and Marcus found himself in his grandfather's old study. William Sterling had died 10 years ago, and this room had sat untouched since. Catherine had wanted to redecorate. Diana had wanted to claim it as her own. Marcus had forbidden both, preserving it like a museum to a man he was starting to hate. He'd come looking for anything on the Moreno family. His father had said William kept records of everything, documented his crimes with the obsessive precision of a man who wanted his victories remembered. The study was all dark wood and leather, books lining walls that had witnessed 50 years of empire building. Marcus started systematically checking behind paintings, under rugs, inside hollow book spines. Found nothing. He was about to give up when his hand brushed against a specific volume. Machiavelli's The Prince, leather-bound, first edition. It shifted under pressure. The bookshelf swung inward with a sound like a sigh. Behind it, stairs descended into darkness. The basement archive was climate-controlled, professionally maintained, and absolutely secret. Filing cabinets lined concrete walls. A desk sat in the center, papers organized with military precision, and against the far wall, a safe that looked like it belonged in a bank vault. Marcus stood at the threshold, heart pounding in a way it hadn't since he was 15, and watching his father burn. This was where the empire's real history lived, not in boardrooms or public records, but here in the dark beneath the foundations. He descended. The safe was biometric, but William had been dead a decade. The backup combination lock glowed softly in the dim light. Marcus tried his grandfather's birthday. Nothing. His mother's birthday. Nothing. The empire's founding date. Nothing. Then, on instinct he didn't fully understand, Richard Sterling's birthday. The safe opened. Inside, a metal box. Inside that, documents yellowed with time and secrets that felt like they were burning his hands just by touching them. Marcus carried the box upstairs to his study, locked the door, poured 3 fingers of whiskey he wouldn't drink, and started reading. Document 1 was a will, handwritten, dated 1974, witnessed by 3 attorneys whose signatures were notarized and legally binding. I, Carlos Moreno, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my entire estate to my daughter, Sofia Moreno. The estate was listed in meticulous detail. Import-export operations spanning 15 states, real estate holdings in 6 major cities, port access in New York, Baltimore, and Miami, labor union connections, political leverage carefully cultivated over 30 years, everything Marcus controlled, everything he'd inherited, everything that was supposed to be the Sterling legacy. All of it had belonged to Carlos Moreno first. Marcus read the will 3 times, each reading making his hand shake harder. Then he set it aside and picked up the second document. William Sterling's journal, leather-bound, filled with handwriting Marcus knew as well as his own. Entry, January 1974. Carlos is weakening. The poison works slowly, arsenic in doses small enough to mimic heart disease. Doctor suspects nothing. Another 6 months and the empire is mine. Marcus stopped reading. Had to. The words swam in front of his eyes like they were written in blood. His grandfather hadn't just stolen the empire. He'd murdered for it, slowly, methodically, over months of watching a man who trusted him die by inches. Entry, June 1974. Carlos died today, funeral tomorrow. I'll be chief pallbearer, the loyal right hand mourning his master. The forged will is ready. Rafael Cruz will take the fall if anyone investigates. Poor fool actually believes I'll protect his wife if he stays quiet. Entry, August 1974. Sofia is a problem. Smart like her father, asking questions. Need to neutralize without killing. Too suspicious. Solution found. She's in love with Daniel Lawson, the pianist. Give her a choice. Love or legacy. She'll choose love. They always do. Marcus set the journal down before he put his fist through something. William Sterling. The man who'd raised him. The genius businessman Marcus had spent 20 years trying to emulate. A murderer. A thief. A monster who'd engineered the destruction of an entire family over years of careful, deliberate cruelty. And Marcus had worshipped him. Name. The third file was labeled simply Richard. Marcus stared at the folder for a full minute before opening it. Knowing what was inside would destroy him. Knowing he had to read it anyway. Entry, April 2004. Richard found the safe today. He knows everything. Confronted me tonight. Threatened to go to authorities to return everything to the Moreno heir. Foolish boy thinks justice matters more than family. Entry, April 2004, 3 days later. Brake lines are simple, clean. Car accident on a bridge happens all the time. The boy Marcus will inherit. He has my instincts. He'll be worthy where Richard was weak. Entry, April 2004, the day after Richard died. Richard died begging me to spare the Moreno girl, Elena Cruz's daughter, Sofia's grandchild. I promised I would. A lie, but it comforted him. The child is 7, easy to eliminate. We'll handle personally. Marcus couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at words that rewrote his entire life. Entry, May 2004. The Cruz family eliminated. Raphael and Elena dead. Child escaped. Complications. But she's 7 years old running through a trafficking network. Won't survive. Problem solved itself. Entry, June 2004. Marcus blames himself for not being in that car with Richard. Good. Guilt makes men driven. I'll shape that guilt into power. He'll be everything Richard refused to become. The scream that tore out of Marcus Sterling came from somewhere deeper than his lungs. Came from 21 years of guilt and grief and self-hatred, all of it built on a lie. The sound brought Nathan running, brought guards with weapons drawn, brought half the household security to his study door. They found him on the floor surrounded by documents, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he'd believed. Nathan read over his shoulder, and his face went gray. Sir, I didn't know. God, I didn't know. Marcus couldn't speak, could only sit there while his right hand read about how William Sterling had murdered his own son to protect an empire built on theft and lies, had framed it as opportunity, had turned Marcus into the monster Richard died trying to stop. 21 years, Marcus finally whispered. 21 years I blamed myself for not being in that car. He looked up at Nathan with eyes that held nothing but ashes. And he died because of me, because I was the worthy heir. Nathan found another folder, this one thicker. Sir, there's more here, marriage certificate, birth certificates. He spread them on the floor. Daniel Lawson and Sophia Moreno, married 1983. Elena Cruz, born 1984, father listed as Daniel Lawson. Isabella Cruz, born 1997, mother listed as Elena Cruz. The genealogy was clear. Carlos Moreno, founder. Sophia Moreno, heir. Elena Cruz, heir. Isabella Cruz, current legal heir. Under any legitimate reading of inheritance law, Isabella owned everything Marcus had. Marcus started laughing, bitter, broken sound that had nothing to do with humor. The dancer I imprisoned is the queen I stole the throne from. He looked at the documents scattered around him like evidence at a crime scene. Father died trying to return the empire to her family, and I've been holding her captive in her own house. The irony was so complete it felt like divine punishment. Bow. Same night, different visitor. Gabriel Cruz came through the servant passage Isabella had found behind the wardrobe, moving with the confidence of someone who'd helped build this mansion 40 years ago when it belonged to Carlos Moreno and had a different name. Isabella jerked awake at the sound of old wood creaking, but the man who emerged from the shadows had her father's eyes. Don't be afraid, mija. His voice carried decades of grief and determination in equal measure. I'm Gabriel Cruz, your uncle, Raphael's brother. He was 65, dressed in black, carrying an old leather briefcase that looked like it had survived wars. I've been watching you for 11 years, Gabriel said, sitting in the chair Marcus had occupied nights before, waiting for the right moment. That moment is now. Why now? Because Marcus Sterling found his grandfather's safe tonight. Gabriel's weathered hands opened the briefcase. He knows the truth about the empire, about your bloodline, about what his family stole from ours. He pulled out documents, spreading them across the table. Original ownership papers. Carlos Moreno to Sophia Moreno. Marriage certificate proving Daniel and Sophia's union. Birth certificates showing your lineage. Evidence of William Sterling's crimes. Everything we need to take it all back. Isabella looked at the papers, then at her uncle. Why now, she repeated. Why tonight specifically? Because he'll either kill you or use you. Gabriel leaned forward, urgency making his voice sharp. We can't wait to find out which. Isabella's mind, trained by 11 years of reading the Sterling household, by 3 years before that of reading traffickers, by a lifetime of survival, ran the angles. He asked about Daniel Lawson tonight. He already suspected something. Then you understand. Gabriel's hands trembled slightly. These men, Isabella, they take. It's all they know. Even if he knows you're the heir, he won't give up power, not voluntarily. She looked at the documents that represented justice, revenge, everything she should want. Said the word Gabriel didn't expect. No. What? We run. He hunts us. He has resources. Isabella stood, pacing the small space between window and door. We take him to court. It's years of litigation. He has lawyers. We go public. He has politicians who bury it. She stopped at the window, looking out at grounds that were supposedly hers by right, but felt like enemy territory. We can't beat him by running, Uncle. Gabriel's face hardened. Then what? We beat him from inside. Isabella turned, and in her eyes Gabriel saw Sophia's fire. He wants to know what I know. I'll tell him. All of it, and we'll see what kind of man he really is. You're gambling your life. I've been doing that since I was 7. She gestured to the scars visible through her thin nightgown. This is just another bet. Gabriel stood slowly, old joints protesting. You're more like Sophia than I realized. She'd be proud. He paused at the hidden passage. But she'd also tell you not to trust Sterlings. They've earned nothing but suspicion. I don't trust him, Isabella said, but I understand him, and understanding is leverage. Gabriel left the documents and disappeared back into the walls, leaving Isabella alone with evidence that could destroy Marcus Sterling's world. She didn't burn them, didn't hide them, left them on the table where Marcus would see them when he came tomorrow night. Because Gabriel was wrong about one thing. The moment wasn't now. The moment was coming, and Isabella Cruz intended to be ready for it. Then, 3 a.m. and Marcus came to Isabella's room with demons chasing him. He didn't knock, didn't pretend this was anything but need. He entered with a briefcase in one hand and the weight of 21 years in his eyes. Isabella sat at the table where Gabriel's documents were spread like cards in a poker game. She'd known he'd come, had been waiting. Marcus stopped when he saw the papers. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, ownership documents. I found it, he said, his voice scraped raw. All of it. He set his briefcase beside hers, opened it, pulled out William's journal and the forged will, and the detailed documentation of 50 years of crimes. You're Carlos Moreno's great-granddaughter, legal heir to everything I have. He looked at her with something that might have been desperation. And my grandfather killed everyone you loved to steal it. Isabella had prepared for this moment, had practiced staying calm, staying strategic, but something in his face made her deviate from the plan. I know, she said simply. How long have you known? Fully? Tonight. Gabriel brought documents. She gestured to the papers. But I've suspected for years. Marcus laughed, sharp and bitter. Why didn't you use it? Could have destroyed me any time. With what resources? What lawyers? What protection? Isabella stood, facing him across the table that separated them. Your grandfather hunted me when I was 7. I survived by staying invisible. My father died trying to give it back to you. The words came out broken, and Isabella saw the cracks in Marcus Sterling's armor for the first time. He told her about Richard's discovery, about the argument he'd overheard as a teenager, about the bridge and the fire and dying words that had haunted him for 21 years. I was 15. I worshipped my grandfather. Marcus sat heavily, no longer the king of anything, just a man drowning in revelations. He made me watch my father burn, then told me it was Richard's weakness that killed him. And you believed him. I was 15, Marcus repeated. But yes, I believed him. And I spent 21 years becoming exactly what he wanted. He looked up at her, and Isabella saw something she'd never expected to see in Marcus Sterling's eyes. Shame. What are you going to do, he asked. You could take this to media, destroy the Sterling name, take it to court, win eventually. He paused. Or, we could make a deal. Isabella's eyebrows rose. What kind of deal? Empire for empire. Marcus stood, and despite everything, he still moved like a man used to command. I give you controlling interest. 51%. You're the queen, on paper and in practice. I run operations as your employee. Why would you do that? Because my father would have wanted it. He met her eyes. Because it's right, and because you're better than me. Isabella studied him, looking for the trap she knew had to be there. That dance, Marcus continued, you didn't just survive hell, you walked out of it and made it beautiful. That's leadership I can't teach. But there's a condition. Always is. The ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Help me fix it before we transfer power. Empire's bleeding. Traitor in ranks. Enemies circling. If I hand you chaos, you'll be dead in a month. He stepped closer, and his voice dropped to something almost pleading. Let me secure it first. 3 months, then it's yours. Isabella ran the calculation, saw the logic, saw the delay tactic, saw also that he was right about the chaos part. How long? 3 months, maybe 6. 3, not negotiable. Marcus held out his hand. Deal. They shook, and it wasn't romance. Wasn't even friendship. Just 2 operators forming an alliance built on mutual need and the ghosts of parents who tried to do the right thing. Neither of them fully trusted the other yet, but trust could wait. Survival couldn't. Morning brought Diana's response. She'd heard everything through the listening device she'd planted in Isabella's room 6 months ago. Heard about the documents. Heard about the deal. Heard her brother planning to give away an empire she'd spent 23 years believing should be hers. Diana Sterling had been patient, had waited, had played the dutiful sister while her grandfather told her secrets in his final years. "I know about the Moreno girl," William had said from his deathbed. "Isabella Cruz. She's Sophia's bloodline. Keep her close. Keep her watched. When the time is right, eliminate her." Diana had been 23 then, had spent the next 10 years being patient. But patience had limits. She made 3 phone calls before breakfast. Boston, Chicago, Seattle. The underbosses who'd questioned Marcus yesterday. The ones who valued profit over loyalty. "Marcus is compromised," she told each of them in turn. "Planning to give the empire to a maid. We need new leadership." "What do you propose?" "Support me. I'll expand your territories. Better terms. More autonomy." Her voice carried the kind of certainty that made men believe. "All I need is your backing." "And Marcus?" "Will be handled, along with his dancing queen." The agreements came within the hour. 40% of the empire's fighting force. Enough to win if played right. But Diana needed leverage. Something to force Marcus's hand before he could rally his remaining loyalists. She knew exactly what that something was. Catherine Sterling lived in a small house by the sea, 3 hours from Manhattan. Peaceful, isolated, protected by exactly 2 guards who were loyal to the family, but not prepared for what came at dawn. The extraction took 4 minutes. Professional crew, no witnesses. Catherine was drugged, bound, and gone before the sun finished rising. Diana called Marcus at 9 a.m. "Brother, we need to talk." Marcus, still in his study surrounded by evidence of their grandfather's crimes, felt ice slide down his spine at her tone. "I have mother, and I have 3 families backing me." Diana's voice carried across the phone line like a knife. "You have 24 hours to transfer complete control to me. Everything. Or mother dies. Then you. Then your little dancing queen." She paused, and her next words were almost cheerful. "Oh, and Marcus, I've known about Isabella's bloodline for 10 years. Grandfather told me. Made me promise to watch her. I've been waiting for this moment since I was 23. The line went dead. Marcus sat in silence for 10 seconds. 20, 30. Nathan appeared in the doorway, summoned by instinct or years of reading his boss's moods. "What do we do?" Marcus looked at the documents spread across his desk. His father's death, his grandfather's crimes, Isabella's birthright, all of it built on lies and blood. He'd spent 21 years being what William wanted, being ruthless, being cold, being strong in all the ways that didn't matter. Time to be strong in the way Richard had tried to teach him. "Something I should have done 21 years ago," Marcus said, standing. "Trust someone." He went to Isabella's room, knocked this time, waited for permission. Found her dressed and alert, already planning like she knew something was coming. "They have my mother." The words came out harder than he intended. "They're coming for both of us. I need your help." Isabella could have gloated, could have refused, could have used this moment to extract every advantage. Instead, she asked the only question that mattered. "What's the play?" 6 hours until Diana's deadline. Marcus's study had become a war room. Maps of the city spread across every surface. Weapons laid out on the desk. 5 people standing around a table planning assault like generals. Marcus, Isabella, Nathan Cole, Gabriel Cruz emerged from shadows to help his niece. And Maestro Thomas Lawson, revealed now as intelligence asset, who'd worked for Carlos Moreno 40 years ago and never stopped gathering information. "Diana has 3 crews," Nathan reported, markers moving across the map. "Boston, 40 men, Chicago, 35, Seattle, 30, total 105 hostiles. We have 60 confirmed loyal," Marcus said. "We're outgunned. Not outgunned, outpositioned." Marcus's strategic mind, trained by 2 decades of staying ahead of threats, saw the angles. They're spread across 3 cities. We're concentrated. Diana's weakness is she's never run an operation. She's strategist, not tactician. Isabella spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through planning like a blade. "Where's she holding Catherine?" "Old Waterfront Warehouse, Patterson Street." "I know it." Isabella's eyes went distant, accessing 11 years of accumulated intelligence. "Worked a catering event there a year ago, 2 entrances, loading dock and front office, 3 floors, basement, main upper offices." Gabriel looked at his niece with something like pride. "She'll expect frontal assault." "So we don't give her one," Isabella said. The plan formed in 20 minutes, refined in 20 more. Three-pronged attack. Maestro Thomas through the front, negotiating, creating distraction. Isabella and Nathan through loading dock, extracting Catherine. Marcus in strike force holding position, waiting for signal. Gabriel's final contribution came from 40 years of maintaining Carlos Moreno's old networks. I still have contacts at the docks, Union enforcers, can have 50 men on standby. Not fighters, but bodies. Confusion factor. Do it, Marcus said. They armed themselves as afternoon bled into evening. Isabella was fitted with communications equipment in Kevlar vest under clothing. Nathan checked weapons with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been preparing for violence his entire adult life. Marcus found Isabella as she was adjusting her vest, making sure it sat right under her jacket. "You don't have to do this," he said. She looked at him with eyes that had seen hell and walked out stronger. "Yes, I do. For Catherine. And for me." Understanding passed between them. Not friendship yet, not trust, but recognition of shared purpose. "If this goes wrong," Marcus said, "it won't." Isabella's certainty carried the weight of someone who'd survived worse. "I didn't dance my way out of death just to die in a warehouse." Night fell over Manhattan like a curtain on the final act, and in the growing darkness, pieces moved into position for a confrontation that would decide who owned the empire built on blood. Three families thought they were seizing power. One woman thought she was securing her birthright, but the game had changed when no one was looking. And the only question left was who would survive long enough to realize it. 6 p.m. Maestro Thomas Lawson approached the Patterson Street warehouse like a man walking to his own execution. Two guards stood at the front entrance, Boston crew by their leather jackets and the way they held themselves. Professional but bored, not expecting an old man in an expensive suit to be a threat. "I'm here to speak with Diana Sterling," Thomas said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from 40 years of commanding orchestras. "She's expecting an offer." The first guard reached for his radio. "Got an old guy here, says he's got terms." Diana's voice crackled through static. "Send him up." The elevator was industrial, all steel and rattling cables that groaned under Thomas's weight. Third floor. The ride gave him exactly 43 seconds to steady his breathing, to remember that he'd survived worse than this during the Cold War when he'd gathered intelligence for Carlos Moreno. The doors opened onto what used to be executive offices, now converted into command center. Diana sat behind a desk worth more than most cars, flanked by two lieutenants. Vincent Torino from Boston, all swagger and expensive cologne. Sal Benedetti from Chicago, working a toothpick between his teeth like this was a baseball game. Through the office window, Thomas could see the warehouse floor below. Catherine Sterling sat bound to a chair in the center, 20 men positioned around her in defensive formation. Good tactical setup. Diana had learned something from her brother. "Maestro," Diana's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Surprise Marcus sent you." "He sent his terms," Thomas said, moving to the window like he was admiring the view. Counting guards, noting positions, mapping escape routes the way Carlos had taught him decades ago. "Complete immunity, you and your allies, in exchange for Catherine Sterling's release and guarantee of no retaliation." Diana laughed, the sound echoing off concrete walls. "That's not terms. That's surrender with courtesy." Below them, invisible in the gathering dark, Isabella and Nathan were making their approach. 6:15 p.m. loading dock. The guard never saw it coming. One moment he was checking his phone. The next, Nathan Cole's arm was around his throat, applying pressure to the carotid artery with the precision of someone who'd done this too many times to count. 7 seconds, and the guard went limp. Nathan lowered him silently, dragged the body into shadows. Isabella followed him into the warehouse, every sense heightened. The service corridor smelled of rust and old motor oil. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting shadows that moved like living things. Nathan moved on point, suppressed Glock held in practice two-hand grip. Isabella stayed 3 steps behind, eyes scanning for threats, for cameras, for anything that could compromise them. The communications device in her ear crackled softly. Marcus's voice, 2 blocks away, with 30 men waiting for the signal. "Package 1 is moving." Isabella touched her throat mic. "Copy." They cleared the first 2 rooms in silence. Storage area empty, break room with 2 hostiles playing cards, but the corridor bypassed it without forcing engagement. Nathan hand signaled, "Wait, observe, continue." The warehouse floor was visible now through grimy office windows. Catherine in the center, surrounded by guards who looked alert and ready. Too many for direct assault, too exposed for stealth extraction. Isabella studied the layout, mind working through options. Fire alarm would create chaos, but also alert everyone. Cutting power would give them darkness, but guards had flashlights. Needed something that would pull security away from Catherine without obviously being an attack. Marcus, she whispered into the mic, we need a distraction. Something loud but not here. 2 blocks away, Marcus smiled grimly. Nathan, thoughts? Nathan's voice came through clear, despite being transmitted from inside the warehouse. Car alarm, street side, maybe 2, gets them looking outward. Done. Marcus signaled to his crew. 60 seconds later, 2 Mercedes sedans parked across the street began screaming their electronic distress into the night. On the warehouse floor, guards turned toward windows. 8 of 20 shifted position, moving to investigate. Isabella and Nathan moved.
Yeah.
3rd floor. Thomas kept Diana talking. You want to know why I'm doing this? Diana stood, pacing behind her desk like a prosecutor making closing arguments. Not greed, not even ambition, principle. Enlighten me, Thomas said, playing his role. My father Richard was weak. Marcus is weak. Grandfather built this empire on strength. Real strength. The kind that takes what it wants and keeps it. Her eyes burned with certainty that made Thomas's skin crawl. I'm the only one who inherited his vision. Your grandfather built it on theft and murder. Thomas let an edge into his voice, knowing it would keep her engaged. I was there. I knew Carlos Moreno. He was 10 times the man William Sterling was. Diana's hand went to the gun on her desk, fingers caressing metal. Carlos Moreno was a loser who got outplayed. That's how the world works, Maestro. The strong take from the weak. Then you'll die like your grandfather, Thomas said softly. Alone and hated. But I'll die rich. She raised the gun. The window exploded inward.
But
Marcus's sniper, positioned on a rooftop 200 yards away, put a round through the office window at the exact moment Isabella and Nathan hit the main floor. Chaos erupted like a bomb going off. The round took Vincent Torino in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him behind the desk. Diana dove for cover. Sal pulled his weapon but had no target. On the main floor, Nathan emerged from the service corridor firing. 3-round burst, practiced and precise. 2 guards went down before anyone understood what was happening. Marcus and 30 men hit the front entrance. 6 seconds later, flash bangs through windows, smoke grenades rolling across concrete, the hammer falling hard and fast. The warehouse became a war zone. Isabella sprinted across the main floor, using smoke for cover, using chaos for concealment. Bullets cracked past her, some close enough to feel the air displacement. She slid behind a concrete pillar next to Catherine's chair. I've got you, Isabella said, pulling a knife from her belt and sawing through zip ties. Catherine's eyes went wide with recognition and terror. Isabella, why are you here? You need to run. Later, can you move? Yes. The ties parted. Both women sprinted for the service corridor. Nathan laying down, covering fire that kept heads down and bought them seconds. Diana saw them escaping from her 3rd-floor vantage point, saw her leverage disappearing into smoke. Fall back to 2nd floor, she barked at Sal and the wounded Vincent. Controlled retreat, make them pay for every inch. It was the right tactical call. Diana might not have run operations before, but she'd studied enough to know when to hold ground and when to trade space for time. The Sterling loyalists hit organized resistance on the stairwells, the kind of close quarters fighting that turned hallways into meat grinders. Marcus led from the front, moving with the cold efficiency of someone who'd been preparing for violence his entire adult life. A round caught him in the chest. Kevlar stopped it, but the impact felt like getting hit with a sledgehammer. Ribs cracked. He kept moving. 2nd floor was worse. Diana's crews had barricaded themselves in offices, creating crossfire kill zones that cost Marcus 6 men in the first 2 minutes. Smoke and clear, he ordered, and his people responded like the professionals they were. Grenades deployed, offices filled with choking gray clouds. Sterling crews moved in pairs, methodical, leaving no room uncleared. It took 9 minutes to secure the 2nd floor. 9 minutes of close-range violence that left both sides bleeding. But Marcus's people won. Superior training, superior discipline, superior reason to fight. Diana retreated to the 3rd floor with 8 men, down to her last defensive position. Vincent bleeding heavily from his shoulder wound. Sal looking at exits and calculating odds that were getting worse by the second. Boss, Vincent said through gritted teeth, we're done. Need to surrender. No. Diana's voice carried the kind of certainty that comes before catastrophic decisions. We have 1 play left. She grabbed Thomas Lawson by the collar and put her gun to his head. Marcus reached the 3rd floor landing to find his sister holding a gun, to a 68-year-old man's temple. Marcus, stop or he dies. The Sterling crews froze. 20 guns pointed at Diana's position, but no clean shot. Thomas was too good a shield. Let him go, Diana. Drop weapons, all of you! Her voice climbed toward hysteria. Or I execute the maestro. Thomas met Marcus's eyes across 30 feet of warehouse space. Don't listen to her. Finish it. Diana pistol whipped him, opening a cut above his eye. Blood ran down the old man's face. Shut up! Standoff. 20 guns against one. But the one had leverage and was unstable enough to use it. Everyone backs off, Diana demanded. I walk out with Thomas. Once I'm clear, I release him. Marcus calculated in 3 seconds. Could rush her. 50-50 chance Thomas died. Could negotiate. Better odds, but gave Diana time to think. Before he could choose, a voice cut through the tension. Diana, let him go. Isabella stepped onto the 3rd floor, hands visible and empty. She'd sent Catherine down with Nathan. Come back because she knew how this would end if someone didn't change the equation. Diana swung the gun from Thomas to Isabella. This is your fault. Everything was fine until you showed up. It wasn't fine, Isabella said, walking slowly forward. It was stolen from my family, from Marcus's father, from everyone William Sterling destroyed. She kept moving, drawing Diana's focus, giving Thomas space to slump away from the gun. William built an empire! Diana's beautiful face twisted with rage and something like grief. You people just lived in it. We built it. Isabella stopped 10 feet away, close enough to be a threat, close enough to make Diana choose. He stole it. There's a difference. Not anymore. Diana's finger tightened on the trigger. Marcus moved, lunged between the gun and Isabella for the 2nd time in a week, body covering hers as Diana fired. The bullet took him high in the right shoulder, missing the vest, punching through muscle and bone. Blood sprayed across concrete in Isabella's face. He went down hard. Isabella caught him, screaming something that might have been his name or might have been just rage-given voice. Diana stared at her hand like it had betrayed her. She'd meant to shoot Isabella, wanted to end the woman who'd stolen her brother's attention, her birthright, everything Diana believed should be hers. But Marcus had stepped in front. Again, the hesitation cost her. Nathan Cole, who'd been moving through shadows while everyone watched the drama unfold, put a round through Diana's gun hand from 15 feet away. Her weapon clattered to concrete. She collapsed, screaming, clutching shattered fingers. Vincent and Sal and the remaining loyalists dropped their weapons, smart enough to know it was over, smart enough to value survival over loyalty to a cause that had just died. Isabella pressed her hands to Marcus's wound, trying to stop arterial bleeding that pulsed between her fingers like a living thing. Why do you keep doing this? Her voice broke on the words. Marcus looked up at her, gray eyes already going hazy from blood loss, but managed something that might have been a smile. Because each word cost him, father would have. Then his eyes rolled back and the world went away. 4 hours of surgery. Isabella sat in a hospital waiting room that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Hands still carrying Marcus's blood under her fingernails, no matter how many times she scrubbed them. Catherine sat beside her, one arm around Isabella's shoulders. Nathan paced like a caged animal. Gabriel stood by windows watching dawn break over Manhattan. Thomas, head bandaged, played silent chords on his knee. The surgeon emerged at 5 a.m., still in scrubs, looking exhausted. He'll live. Bullet missed the artery by centimeters, but long recovery, 3 to 6 months before full mobility. The relief hit Isabella like a physical force. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been wound until the tension released. Can I see him? I see you, 10 minutes. Marcus looked small in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed. Tubes and wires turned him into something between man and medicine. But his chest rose and fell steadily, and that was enough. Isabella sat in the chair beside his bed, took his hand carefully, avoiding IV lines. You're an idiot, she whispered. Taking bullets for people. Very bad habit. No response. Machines beeped their mechanical lullaby. But thank you. The words came harder. For being better than your grandfather, for choosing to be your father's son. She sat there until nurses made her leave, holding the hand of a man who'd started as her jailer and become something she didn't have words for yet. Day 4, Marcus woke, groggy, disoriented, fighting through morphine haze to consciousness. First thing he saw was Isabella asleep in the chair beside his bed, head tilted at an angle that would give her a terrible neckache. Isabella, his voice came out rough as sandpaper. She jerked awake and relief flooded her face before she could mask it. You're awake. Mother? Safe, home with guards. Empire? Isabella's lips quirked slightly. Nathan's running it. Under my authority, we honored our deal. Marcus processed this through the fog of pain medication. You took control? Temporarily, until you recover, then we formalized transfer. Could have taken it all while I was out. Could have. Isabella met his eyes, but that's not who I am. Marcus looked past her to where his mother stood in the doorway. You knew, he said to Catherine, about Isabella, about everything. Catherine moved to the bed, tears streaming down her face. Richard made me promise, before he died, protect the Moreno bloodline. I did the only thing I could think of. Hired her, kept her close, tried to keep her safe. I'm sorry I couldn't do more, Catherine whispered. Marcus closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, something had changed in their gray depths. You did what you could with what you had. That's all any of us can do. 6 weeks later, federal courthouse. Diana Sterling's trial lasted 3 days. The evidence was overwhelming. Kidnapping, attempted murder, racketeering, conspiracy. The prosecutors had recordings, testimony, physical evidence that painted a picture of calculated violence. Marcus testified, arms still in a sling, detailed his sister's coup attempt with the kind of clinical precision that made the jury uncomfortable. He didn't embellish, didn't need to. Facts were damning enough. Isabella testified, described 11 years of serving a household that should have been hers, showed scars that made the jury look away, answered questions in a voice that never wavered. Catherine testified through tears, spoke of promises made to a dying husband, of watching her daughter become the monster her father-in-law had been, of failing everyone she tried to protect. The defense argued temporary insanity, coercion, claimed Diana was a pawn of bigger players. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. 25 years federal prison, no parole eligibility for 15. Diana stood for sentencing and spoke her final words as a free woman. I regret nothing. Sterlings take what they want. That's who we are. The judge, a woman who'd spent 30 years on the bench, looked at her with something like pity. Not anymore, Miss Sterling. Not anymore. Outside the courthouse, Marcus faced reporters with the kind of control he'd spent 20 years perfecting. My sister made choices. She'll pay for them. The Sterling family is entering a new era, one built on restitution, not exploitation. Flashbulbs popped. Questions shouted. Marcus ignored all of it and walked to the car where Isabella waited. How do you feel? She asked as they pulled away from the courthouse. Like I buried my sister 6 weeks ago and just watched them lock up her ghost. Marcus stared out the window at a city that no longer felt like his kingdom. She was right about one thing. We are what we choose to be. She chose William's way. And you chose Richard's. Trying to. He looked at Isabella. Still trying. 3 months after the warehouse. Marcus's arm had healed enough to sign documents without assistance. Sterling Manor's Great Hall held 50 witnesses, lawyers, accountants, federal observers ensuring everything was legal and binding. Thomas Lawson sat at the grand piano, not playing, just present. Catherine in the front row, Gabriel beside her. Nathan standing against the wall like he was guarding a perimeter. The documents covered the mahogany table like a map to a new world. Transfer of controlling interest in Sterling Holdings, LLC. Assets totaling $2.3 billion across 15 states. Real estate, import-export. Legitimate businesses that had been cleaned over 3 months of intense legal work. The underground operations were gone, dismantled or transitioned to legal enterprises. Marcus had kept his word, fixed what could be fixed, made restitution where possible. Now came the transfer. Isabella sat across from Marcus, both of them in business attire, both carrying the weight of 50 years of history. One change, Isabella said before signing. The lawyers looked up. Ms. Cruz? Marcus retains 40%. I take 35. Marcus's pen stopped midway to paper. That's not what we agreed. I'm changing the terms. Isabella met his eyes. You've proven you're not your grandfather, and I can't run this alone. Your father and grandfather built it wrong, but they built it. Let's rebuild it right, together. The word hung between them. Together. Partnership instead of conquest. Shared responsibility instead of sole ownership. Marcus studied her face, looking for the angle, the trap, the hidden agenda. Found only someone who'd made the same calculation he had. That revenge was empty. That legacy mattered more than pride. You're sure? I'm sure. They signed. Isabella Cruz, 35%. Marcus Sterling, 40%. Catherine Sterling, 15%. Foundation Trust for Trafficking Survivors, 10%. The lawyers notarized. The accountants verified. The federal observers documented everything for records that would outlive everyone in the room. When it was done, Gabriel leaned over to whisper in Isabella's ear. Sophia would be proud, or think you're crazy. Both, Isabella whispered back. Thomas played a soft chord on the piano, not celebration, just acknowledgement that something had ended and something else had begun. 1 year later, the Sterling Moreno Foundation Gala filled the grand ballroom where Isabella had once danced for her life. But tonight, the room held different energy. 300 guests, but these were nonprofit leaders, social workers, survivors of trafficking who'd been rescued by foundation operations. The empire had transformed. Legitimate businesses expanded. Affordable housing projects launched in 6 cities. Port operations still controlled, but union-friendly now. Political contributions disclosed and legal. The Foundation's first-year report showed 400 children rescued from trafficking, 50 families relocated with new identities, 12 schools funded, 200 students in the dance academy that bore Sophia Moreno's name. Marcus stood at a microphone, no longer the king of anything but something better. A man trying to build instead of take. Year ago, I inherited a legacy built on blood. My grandfather stole it. My father died trying to return it. I spent 21 years defending it. He paused, looking out at faces that held hope instead of fear. Tonight, we transform it. Applause, genuine and warm. Isabella took the microphone next, and the room quieted to hear the woman who danced her way from death to ownership. I'm Isabella Cruz Moreno Lawson, great-granddaughter of Carlos Moreno, who built honestly, granddaughter of Sophia Moreno, who danced beautifully, daughter of Elena Cruz, who died protecting me, and partner of Marcus Sterling, who chose honor over empire. She gestured to the curtain behind her. Tonight, we dedicate the Richard Sterling School for At-Risk Youth, named for the man who taught his son that true strength is protecting others, not dominating them. The curtain dropped, revealing architectural renderings of a building that would house education, counseling, job training. A place where kids like Isabella had been could find something better. Catherine cried in the front row. Thomas played soft accompaniment. Gabriel nodded approval. Nathan Cole, standing security despite this being a civilian event, allowed himself a small smile. The architect presented plans. The director outlined programs. Survivors spoke about what the foundation had given them. Then Thomas returned to the piano. One more piece tonight, he said, his aged voice carrying across the ballroom. Written 40 years ago by my son Daniel, for the woman he loved, Sophia Moreno. His fingers found the keys, and the melody that had saved Isabella's life a year ago filled the room once more. Marcus appeared at Isabella's side, hand extended. May I? She placed her hand in his, and they walked to the dance floor. Not as master and servant, not as enemies, as partners who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to walk toward light. The waltz began. Marcus led with confidence born from months of practice, not the desperation of their warehouse rescue, not the tension of their first meeting, but the steady assurance of someone who'd learned to trust. Isabella followed, then led herself, then followed again. The dance becoming conversation without words, partnership in motion. They moved past the spot where she danced for her life, past where Marcus had held the gun, past where everything had changed. The melody swelled, and they turned faster, more complex choreography that required trust and timing they'd built over months of working side by side. The audience watched in respectful silence as two people who should have been enemies danced like they'd been partners all along. Thomas played the climax with tears streaming down his weathered face. This was Daniel's legacy living on. Sophia's granddaughter dancing not in terror but in triumph. The final notes approached, and Marcus and Isabella ended center floor. Not in embrace, not as lovers, though something was growing there that neither had named yet, but side by side, facing forward, looking toward a future they'd build together. The music stopped. Standing ovation from 300 people who understood they'd witnessed something rare. Not victory, not revenge, but transformation. Isabella looked at the crowd and saw Catherine crying with pride, Gabriel nodding approval, Thomas smiling through tears. Nathan's rare grin. She turned to Marcus. Thank you. For what? For choosing to be your father's son. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. Thank you for teaching me I could be. Patron. 2 weeks later, dawn at Richard Sterling's grave. New headstone, white marble, words Isabella had helped Marcus choose. Richard Sterling, beloved father, honest man, defender of justice. His death was not in vain. Marcus stood with hands in pockets, looking at the grave of a man who tried to do the right thing and paid for it with his life. Isabella stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I found her, Dad," Marcus said quietly. "The Moreno girl. Turned out she found me." He looked at Isabella, and something passed between them that was more than partnership, but not quite love. "Not yet, maybe someday. We're fixing it like you wanted, building on stone this time, not sand." Isabella placed white roses on the grave. "Thank you for trying to protect me, and for raising a son who could finish what you started." They stood in silence while Manhattan woke around them. The city Marcus had once ruled through fear, now led through something closer to service. "What now?" he asked. "We keep building." Isabella turned to face him fully, but on stone this time, not sand. "Together?" She held out her hand and he took it. Not the handshake of their first deal, something warmer. Connection between two people who'd survived hell and chosen not to become the monsters who sent them there. Together, they walked from the cemetery side by side, morning sun breaking through clouds behind them, casting long shadows that merged into one. The empire they'd inherited was transformed. The blood that built it acknowledged. The victims honored. The future uncertain but faced with shared purpose. Marcus Sterling had spent 21 years becoming what his grandfather wanted. Cold, ruthless, efficient. Now he spent every day becoming what his father needed him to be. Just, fair, strong in the ways that mattered. And Isabella Cruz Moreno Lawson, great-granddaughter of Carlos Moreno, granddaughter of Sofia, daughter of Elena, who'd endured 11 years of invisible torment, had claimed her birthright not through revenge, but through the kind of grace her grandmother Sofia had embodied. The waltz was over. The real work was just beginning. But for the first time in their lives, neither of them was facing it alone. Behind them, the grave of Richard Sterling stood testament to the cost of doing right in a world built on wrong, but also to the truth that legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you choose to do with it. Marcus and Isabella chose transformation, and in the choosing became something neither William Sterling nor Carlos Moreno could have predicted. Not enemies bound by blood debt, not allies bound by convenience, but partners bound by shared understanding that some things are worth more than power. Things like honor, justice, the chance to break cycles instead of perpetuate them. The sun climbed higher over Manhattan, painting the city in shades of gold and possibility. And two people who danced through hell walked into that light together, carrying the weight of 50 years of history, but not crushed by it. Transformed by it, made stronger by choosing forgiveness over revenge, partnership over conquest, legacy over empire. The Sterling Moreno Foundation would grow, would save thousands of lives over the coming decades, would transform a criminal empire into an engine for good. But that morning, walking away from Richard Sterling's grave, Marcus and Isabella weren't thinking about foundations or legacies or transformations. They were thinking about breakfast, about the meeting at 9, about the 100 small decisions that would shape tomorrow, about living, finally, instead of just surviving. The waltz had ended. Life was beginning. And this time they'd dance it on their own terms, together,